I'm Lou Bergholz. I'm here with my colleague, Maren Rojas. We're both from Edgework. We're based in the greater Boston area. And for this whole series, we've opted to take the first minute just as a little bit of a kind of framing of how we like to think about this topic. We know that everyone's coming from whatever else is happening in whatever part of the day you're in around the world. And so just use this minute to ground yourself, spotlight some of the young people you're thinking about or working with, whether it's formally in your work or might be in your personal life as well. We want to use this series and set it up as a moment to pause, to reflect, to feel the power of this particular element of your work and care for young people in your lives, and to return with a little extra energy, excitement, and a couple more tools in your toolbox. The caring adult relationship serves as the most predictive factor in a child's resilience. The vital connection is something we all have the power to nurture and harness. And from our perspective, it's the greatest skill set that we can develop, and it doesn't require equipment, facilities, or curriculum. And though you can't always see the impact of love, we must believe that it matters. And for us, we think of each vital connection that we are exploring in this series as not just a young person's wants, but really a need. Wants imply something that you can say no to, and need is like water. You have to have it. Without it, you won't survive. And when we meet a young person's need, we do something truly vital for them. So each session we'll share one story, talk briefly about how this particular vital connection ties into resilience, and then share some of our favorite kind of practical and exciting ways to forge this vital connection. So story first. Between about 2002 and 2008, I supported several youth organizations, youth serving organizations in Malawi. And during this time, Baylor Hospital, which is a big hospital in the US, was pioneering the development of some teen clubs that they were running all over parts of Southern Africa for adolescents living with HIV. The level of stigma around HIV was so high at this time. And it was really terrifying to be anyone, but particularly a young person with HIV. What was being done to people who were disclosing their status was really devastating. At one of the teen clubs, we wanted to address a really crucial challenge that everybody in the club was facing with HIV around disclosure, which is the act of telling someone about your HIV status with sort of the intention and the hope that they would become an ally and a supporter to you. Having this kind of social support was and is crucial to living with any kind of serious illness. To get there, we decided to run a talk show. So we had some staff, some of the kind of younger staff that were running the program work as guests on our show. We had one of the staff moderate it. We had a number of questions prepared in advance that we thought would kind of spark not just the panel conversation, but the interaction with the audience. We had probably 60 or 70 teenagers there. It's a format I've used a lot. It's fun, it's intense, and it just works. We bounced around the disclosure topic for about 30 minutes, and the audience kind of warmed up and began to settle in. They started asking their questions. And this was the low budget talk show. Cardboard microphone. We had people holding pretend cardboard cameras, but it was enough to foster that environment. There was this group of kids that kind of refused to sit in the chairs. They were actually sitting on the floor off to the side, and they were kind of huddled around what I could only just describe as their ringleader. It was really hard to tell if they were paying attention throughout the whole thing. They were chatting and looking at each other. They had their backs to the where the panel was. And then all of a sudden, about 30 minutes in, this one kid, the ringleader, stands up and he raised his hand. We handed him the cardboard microphone, and paraphrasing, because we had to do translation and this happened a while ago, this is what he said. He said, "Look, we're talking about disclosure. It's hard to know who to trust, especially with something like my HIV status." So he said, just very, very matter of fact, here's what I do. I pick someone who's a friend or someone I think I can trust that I hope could be a supporter for me. And then I tell them a secret, but I don't tell them my HIV secret. I tell them another secret, something that's less important to me, but also still a secret. And then I wait a week and I see if the secret gets out in school. If it does, then I know that person is not my person. If it doesn't, then I tell them another secret, something a little more personal, and I wait another week. And if the secret still doesn't get out, then I think I may have someone that I can talk to about having HIV. And then I decide if I want to tell them or not. It's just a brilliant brilliant solution to a really, really complex problem.
We're surrounded by conversations. We talk all the time to other adults in our lives. And when we're privileged and lucky enough to have the opportunity to talk to young people, we have conversations with them too. Conversations really are the building blocks of relationships. They're the thing that sets a foundation to have deeper, more meaningful relationships. And it's unbelievable the way with a young person, if you have the right conversation with the right kid at the right moment in time, how impactful that can be in their lives, whether it's just trying to help them solve a problem, or it's just giving a listening ear to actually a vital conversation where that one thing may be the thing that helps their choice architecture, helps them really make a decision. And it takes a lot of trust to get there. But this is the thing, having conversations with young people, vital conversations, can be the one thing to help keep them on their positive path forward. I mean, there are a lot of different conversations we can have with young people. Everything from the very mundane and basic level to deeper things. Maybe it's giving them some feedback. Maybe it's like we talked about in the last couple of weeks, if you joined us, learning more about their story, or even helping them with their inner voice, their self-talk, and being that affirmation in their ear about the things they are capable of. Maybe it's just helping them navigate a dysregulated experience or opportunity, or maybe it's a sensitive personal history story. Anyway, we have the opportunity to be in a lot of these, but the problem for us a lot as adults is we jump into these. We limit our impact by jumping into these conversations. We go for the, how was your day? Or how was school? These things that are sort of close-ended questions that kids can give us a one-word answer to. They can shrug us off, I don't know. Or maybe it's more poignant and we really need to talk about something, and we ask, what's wrong with you? What's bugging you? Or you've heard, you observed, a child needs to have that particular conversation, and we go there before they're ready. And we start talking about fill in the blank. You can fill it in with whatever: sex, drugs, grades, behavior, even to the point of lose. We go from non-judgmental listening and inquiry and really working with them to the almost lecture mode. Don't steal, don't cheat, to wear a condom. And we become the Charlie Browns of the world with the teacher in the background, wah, 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 to young people. And we miss this opportunity because we have to admit their choice making is complex. What they're going through is complex. And it takes vulnerability to share their opinions, their feelings, to even give sound to their voice. Potentially, we could step away from this and really focus on the process instead of that end result, where we get there. We worked with a group that did some sport for development. And I think about this story often. This young person, this coach was providing bananas, apples, fruits, things that you need after a sports program, but things in his area with his population that kids really needed for food security. And this one young teenager was stealing extra bananas, extra apples all the time. And he could have gone there. Why are you doing this? What's happening? And just jumped in on this conversation, but he led with inquiry instead of lecture. And what he found out was this young person had a brother, and her brother had been in trouble with the law. And her mother knew that the brother had been in trouble with the law, so she kept the window unlocked, and he would sneak in at night and steal the food that was prepared for the young girl. This mother had to work in the evenings. And so she was going hungry a lot. And because this coach didn't jump in too quickly, too soon, too direct, too judgmentally, he was able to get this person then plugged in with a free lunch at school, just because he heard the bigger story and was able to go there with the child. We have a lot of powerful and creative ways we can get there. And that's what we want to do next, is share some of those with you.
So the first thing that I'll suggest is to run a talk show. The talk show I ran in Malawi and that we've run many, many times may seem like a really elaborate way to talk about a topic like disclosure when we could just go there directly in a regular conversation. But in my experience is that the more important the topic, often the more indirect and creative ways get us the best outcome. And that's the thing to keep in mind, right? We're going for an outcome, not necessarily whatever the initial input is as well. And I've seen moments like the ones I described in the talk show in the example, just like again and again and again. There's something about this sort of combination of talk show energy, making everyone the expert, but also the audience, having anonymous questions, standing in front of a cardboard microphone, that it just creates a little bit more openness and candor and enough playfulness that young people get into the space, and then you have the chance to really go there. And I think it's a really powerful example of how creating a really special climate that matches the importance of the topic. And when you do that, you get this sort of longer runway to see if you can open up for the deeper level of conversation. I used to run talk shows on sexuality and relationships with this program in Maine for many years with middle school kids. And we were kind of really focusing on navigating those sort of first relationships, first crushes, falling in love, a little bit of intimacy. And we needed to ensure that we planted the seed around asking for consent. And talking about consent, especially consent for sex with an 8th grader who's 13, 14 years old, like it's too much, it's too explicit, and so you can't really go there. We're talking about something more basic and something more foundational, like asking to hold someone's hand, asking for a kiss. Those are the things that really plant the seed for hopefully the consent kind of philosophy and approach that translates into the harder, kind of more intense situation. So as we were doing the talk show, I would always wait until we're deep into it, and I would ask, how do you know when it's okay to kiss someone? And the answers were amazing. You would get all these incredible sort of 12-year-old answers about, well, you just lean in and see if they lean back, and you do the arm over the shoulder thing. And all of it was fascinating and funny and useful. And it would get the giggles out. And then I would wait for a pause, and I would just say, could you ever just ask them? And the whole room would always go, no, ask for a kiss. That's crazy. I would never do it. And almost every single time, there would be one student who would say, I don't know. I think that's kind of romantic. And it would almost always be someone that, someone else had the crush on, and they would all kind of go, maybe I could ask. And we didn't ask for a vote or a survey of, are you now going to ask for consent? But we're living at that sort of considerate, thoughtful behavior change level where young people have to kind of weigh out options, but they need to have that sort of space to think about and consider on their terms as well. And you can run a talk show like we described with a group. You can also do one at the dinner table, even one-on-one. It's just a little bit of that shift in format that prompts a different level of engagement.
I think about, the work that Lou and I do is we're facilitating a lot. We're facilitators. And in fact, many of you are clinicians. Many of you are youth workers. Many of you are after-school people, teacher people. Facilitating conversations takes a little bit of nuance. You don't just jump right in. You think about the factors. Is there privacy? So the timing, is this the right time to ask this person? Even the right numbers. Is it smaller groups? Does trios work? Does pairs? Does it work to talk one-on-one even with this child? And what does the right start look like? What's your problem may not be the right start for the child. It may have to be a series of questions, a follow-up, thinking about open-ended questions that they may have to expand on. And also think for yourself, how would you respond if the child, using Lou's story about HIV and consent, if the child's answer isn't what you think is the right answer or the way that they should answer, are you willing to sit with that and work through it with the child to really think about their choices? Again, their choice architecture. If A equals B, for them, may equals Z. And for us, there may be a very linear path. I think one of the biggest things that we have to think about is that it takes time. It's not an end result. It's not an end game. It's not, I've got to have this conversation. It's going to go this way. If we can let go of some of these parameters that we put on ourselves to have the right conversation and lean into the leaning, we may get there. And it may take a lot of time, just like Lou's teenager from his story in the beginning. They're like velociraptors testing the fence. They will test out, how are you going to react to this piece of information? How are you going to react to this story about my friend? They will test you and feel you out. And over time, if you can build that trust and rapport, you may have the opportunity to have that right conversation.
I think as adults, we have a lot of experience with conversation. We have more years on the planet to do that. And we know kind of the what, where, when, and how of great conversations. And sometimes we forget some of the elements that we take for granted that really make a big difference. There's an exercise that there's facilitator guides written on this. We can happily share ones that we've created around this too. But the idea of creating a cafe atmosphere, kind of a conversation cafe. I spent a bunch of years working with a youth leadership program in Western Massachusetts, and we had this one weekend retreat, and we needed everybody to kind of find each other, connect, bond, build relationships very quickly. And we would always, on the first night after we spent the day together, kind of get into a room and like transform the room into a little bit of a mock coffee shop and cafe. We didn't serve coffee, but we served tea and hot chocolate, and tried to make it feel and look like a place that was not just another place to talk about life, but the atmosphere really kind of set the tone there. We had ground rules for good listening, not debating, sharing perspective. And then we would just offer one great question for this group to talk about in little groups of 3 or 4 for like 20 minutes. And sometimes we had adults at the table, sometimes we'd float around and kind of listen. But when you sit in on these conversations, the level of depth and openness and consideration for each other is the kind of stuff that often you imagine takes a long time to foster. But once you get it, what we did the next day that was a little more formal and about kind of some topics we had to address, everybody was primed for. But in reality, so many good things were already happening in that kind of atmosphere. And the key to a cafe kind of atmosphere is the climate, kind of what do you do to make it feel and relax and comfortable. And then we invest heavily in the question. It's an amazing experience to challenge yourself to think about, if I want to go to this important topic with this young person in my life or with a group, and I had one question that would hopefully get them there, not immediately, but would lead towards where I need to go, what would be the one question I would ask? And if I had to hopefully have them go there on their own, what would be the question I would set them up with for that to happen? It's an amazing thought experiment to do that and to try it out and then see how far a group or an individual can go when we invest in this facilitation element of questions, not just sort of topics as well.
Adding to that, I think this almost harkens back to our first vital connection that we talked about, was time. And we should think about creating unique ways to have conversations. It doesn't always happen in program or in classroom or when we mean it to happen. But could we actually create unique opportunities for us to have these conversations? And what I mean by that is really informal, organic, where they happen a little bit more naturally, even if we are, as Lou said, setting ourselves up to have maybe a theme or something to chew on together. One of my favorite ways, of course, I'm a sports person, is playing catch. The idea that we don't even have to look at each other necessarily, but we're throwing a ball, catching a ball, throwing a ball, catching a ball, the rhythm and sync that you get in with another person, even to the point of regulating heart rate, to talk about everything from the weather and move into a deeper story, deeper conversation. I think if you're not in sports, I think another way to do that is drawing together, side by side, coloring books, painting, doing something where it's not so intense. The threat of really being eye to eye that could potentially be very dysregulating for a child is gone, because there is this unison and synchronicity happening. Maybe it's doing something physically demanding together. This physical activity, besides the dopamine rush, the adrenaline, the endorphins that fill your body when you do something physical, there is the connection. I got to work in Afghanistan a few years ago with an organization called Free to Run, who's helping young girls get to actually run a marathon. And I got to go on a 9-mile run with them. That was so fun for me. But it was amazing how I ended up running side by side individually with young girls in this program and talking, because I was running very slowly. And of course, we were encouraging each other, motivating each other, and just chatting along the way. There's something that happens in the aftermath of doing something together that's amazing. And then we talked about last week, if you're an organization that does transportation, even if you don't have transportation or wheels, and you're thinking about having an open seat policy where you're making sure that you're available, you could walk together. When we work in Rwanda, the coaches there live in the same neighborhoods and towns of the village that the kids all draw from. Sometimes they have to walk a mile or two, walking together back, sharing snack and mealtime, all of these places where it's not so much intentional, we're going to have this conversation, but we're allowing it to blossom and thrive.
To wrap up here, my wife I think of as a master youth worker. She's a pediatrician, but we met in a youth work setting. And we have a 3-year-old, and I've watched her over the past few months just stop asking our daughter how was school. She hasn't asked how school was in months, but instead she asked questions like, how was gathering circle? Because that's the thing she knows my daughter loves the most. And it just sparks so much more out of her for the rest of her school experience. She asked the question, did you get to play The Floor is Lava today, which is this game she's obsessed with? And whether she plays it or not, it opens up kind of more about it. And then she often just says, let's play school. And it's a different way to get to the outcome. And that's the point, I think, of what we're trying to highlight today, is that conversation is something that is shared, it's facilitated, and that, the deepest, most powerful ones, the ones that really shape a young person and that you can benefit from kind of your relationship with them too, they're really hard to create. And they don't happen through sort of traditional methodologies usually. When we adopt this facilitated approach, we get a much broader toolkit and set of approaches that can help us get to these conversations that we really want to have with the young people in our lives. The big thing, I come out of a youth work background, but also professionally trained as a facilitator. And I think the distinction I make around facilitating is that you have where you are with someone or a group and where you want them, where they need to go, where you hope they could end up. And you imagine these scenarios. And what I do is I often imagine a series of questions, and sometimes the initial questions are really over to the left, but they're intended to connect people, to warm people up, to start at one little specific place and then go somewhere deeper. And I'll give you a great example. When we worked with grassroots soccer in South Africa back in 2009, we were working with master coaches, like some of the best coaches from around the whole kind of continent who were doing HIV/AIDS prevention work. And we really wanted to talk about how hard it is in that moment when you're with someone and the intimacy is sort of in your face, literally, that you can still talk about condoms and put them on, because so many people, everybody knew they were effective and nobody was using them in the ways that people could, not nobody, but they weren't being used as consistently as they could. And we started with this whole other exercise that we called a sex map. And we had groups of coaches kind of map, how do you go from meeting someone to ending up intimate with them in sort of your realities? And it was unbelievable. People were drawing pictures and connecting dots and doing flow charts. And it was this sort of wild, freestyle exercise. But the whole intention was to get to a point where we had everybody then stand up, close their eyes and ask, okay, you've all done your mapping and you think about your situations, whether you're sexually active or not. Close your eyes, keep them closed, raise your hand if in that moment you've still not practiced safe sex. And 2/3 of the room raised their hand. These were some of the most educated, most skillful HIV/AIDS prevention educators on the continent at the time. And they still weren't able to do it themselves. And we had them put their hands down. Nobody knew who raised their hands. And then we launched into this unbelievable conversation about what really happens in that moment when you need to be safe, but so many things come into play. And they were open and vulnerable and being honest as an adult in the room, not as a coach trying to teach kids. And we were able to uncover so many other pieces of what's really, really at that moment where we're trying to be safe and we know we're supposed to, but it's hard to do. And I could share more examples of what came out of that conversation, but we started over here with this idea of mapping, a kind of safe, constructive, creative exercise, kind of fun, playful, a little edgy. And then we knew we were going to try to get to this place. We didn't know it would work. And that's facilitation. You can't guarantee you're going to get there. But if you do, something amazing happens. And if you don't, you try again. And that's what's so hard about curriculum, when today is the day we're going to talk about sex and never again. That may not be the right day for your kids or your child. But knowing that you have multiple tries and you kind of are open to it, I think that's sort of the theme we really wanted to get at around sort of facilitation and conversation today. We are grateful, as always, for everyone being here. Hope it was helpful. And we've got 2 more to go. Next week, we're going to be talking about community. And then we're going to finish with this construct around commitment. So thank you all. Have a great rest of whatever's left in your day.